So this week we celebrated the feast day of one of my favorite apostles, St. John the Evangelist. And I'll tell you a funny little historical footnote. Those of you that remember Piedmont Airlines of happy memory, the first time I'd ever been on a plane, I think we took off from Newark Airport, my mother and I, and we were flying down to stay for a while at my grandmother's house here in North Carolina. So we were flying above the clouds, and there's nothing to do on a plane, so I happened to have my Bible, and I read the whole Gospel of John, flying down from New Jersey to North Carolina. Kind of interesting symbolism there. I had no idea what was coming later on. So the symbol, for St. John's Gospel is the eagle soaring above in the sky. So that was kind of interesting little moment there. But I think that reading the Gospel of John, of all the books in the Bible and of all the Gospels, that one's my favorite and probably has strengthened my faith in Christ the most of any of them. So when I was in high school, we had a project, and we had to write an essay on if we had to be someone else, who would it be and why would we pick them? And I was thinking, well, I don't want to be anybody else. I had just discovered the rosary in my life. I was happy. I had the Blessed Mother. I had my mom and dad, who I loved. I had a quality pick on behalf of God to give me some wonderful parents and my brother and sister. And I didn't want to be anybody else, but we had to pick somebody. So I thought, okay, if I had to pick someone, I guess I would pick St. John the Apostle. He's the one that got to take care of the Blessed Mother. It says in chapter 19 of the Gospel of John, which we have depicted here, there's St. John, and there's Our Lady of Sorrows for the cross. Jesus says to him, "Behold your mother." And it says from that day onward, that disciple took her into his home. So if we go to a spiritual level of the meaning of that statement, we would see that if we take Mary into our spiritual home of our soul through devotion to her, through the rosary and the miraculous medal, we could be like St. John in that sense. Also, we can be like St. John in Eucharistic adoration. Pope St. John Paul II, in his letter on the Eucharist, talks about how those who spend time in Eucharistic adoration are like St. John, the beloved disciple, who reclined on the Sacred Heart of Jesus at the Last Supper. So there was Jesus at the Last Supper, and John was resting his head on his chest above his Sacred Heart. Now, John, if you learn anything from the Gospel of John, John's kind of the guy in the know. And Peter knows it, and he's always asking him stuff. So at the Last Supper, Jesus says, "One of you will betray me." So Peter says to John, so apparently Peter was a little bit further over, and John was closer to Jesus. He said, "Ask him who it is." So then Jesus says to John, "It's the one whom I dip the bread for." And so Judas must have been nearby, I guess, on the other side of Jesus. Not much of a consolation. So there was John lying on top, with his head on top of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, while Jesus was giving us his body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist, in the first Mass, the Last Supper. And there was Judas on the other side, who after he received the morsel, it says he went out and it was dark. So he went out to betray Jesus after receiving communion. Not a good thing. So as we look at the Gospel of John, another instance too is where at the end of the Gospel of John, we see that Jesus shows up on the shore, and Peter doesn't recognize him at first. This is one of the resurrection appearances. And then John, in the know, turns to Jesus and says, "It's the Lord." So then it says, when Peter heard it was the Lord, he jumped into the sea and swam to go to the shore. So anxious was he to see the Lord. So John always seemed to be the guy that knew what was going on. So that, for me, is an example. John is a symbol for the contemplative branch of the church that oftentimes arrives at spiritual truths in the development of doctrine in the history of the church ahead of the hierarchy. So the contemplative branch of the church comes up with things to help understand, like the Immaculate Conception of Mary, and then it passes it on to the hierarchy, which is Peter, and eventually it becomes official teaching. So, also, because you wonder, well, what happened? John wound up, you get up for breakfast every day, and there you are with the Blessed Virgin Mary. That's pretty cool. So that must have had a good effect on him. So we see there's a tradition in the church that John may have been taken bodily into heaven, because when Jesus is talking at the end of the Gospel of John, he's telling Peter, guess what? When you're old, you're going to stretch out your arms and they're going to take you where you don't want to go, meaning he's going to be crucified. So it says very clearly, Jesus said this to indicate by what type of death he would glorify God. So we glorify God when we suffer for him. Not a happy thing, not easy, but that's what we do. So Peter gave his life for Jesus at the end, and then he turns to Jesus and says, what about this man, meaning John? And he says, if I wish him to remain until I return, what is that to you? So it doesn't say that he won't die, but the Romans went to kill St. John. They were going to martyr him. They went to boil him alive in oil, and then he didn't die like he's supposed to, because he was protected. So the Romans were like, this one's different. So they went and exiled him to the island of Patmos, where he had the vision of the book of Revelation. So John's kind of an amazing character. So that was one of the reasons I picked him, was because he got to live with the Blessed Mother, which I thought would be an amazing thing, to be with Mary. And he's the third one to take care of the Blessed Mother. So you have first Joseph. He's the protector of Mary, and then after Joseph dies, Jesus is there taking care of Mary, and then when Jesus dies on the cross, he hands over protection for Mary to John, the beloved disciple. And it says from that moment forward, his disciple took her into his home. Now, another amazing thing is the apparition of Our Lady of Knock. When Mary appeared in Ireland, John was in the apparition, dressed in his bishop's robes with his mitre and everything. So that was kind of interesting that Mary appeared with St. John as the bishop. St. John, bishop and evangelist. So John, to me, was someone to look up to. Now, his writings have something very different from the other Gospels. Some people call it ethical dualism. And he has a constant contrast between light and darkness, spirit and flesh, God and the world, good and evil. So darkness, nobody likes the dark, generally speaking. Darkness is a symbol for sin and evil. And the light is a symbol for truth and grace and blessings. So we have a powerful contrast there. Plus, John gives us the beautiful I am statements. There's 7 of them in the Gospel of John, and I think there's at least one in the book of Revelation where Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. So these I am statements help us understand a little better who Jesus is. So Jesus says, I am the door or the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the vine. You are the branches. Before Abraham came to be, I am. And that connects, of course, with Exodus 3:15, where God says to Moses, I am who am, meaning that God is the cause of his own existence and everything else in the universe that exists. So anything that exists is connected to God to some extent, one way or another. God is all life, all existence, all power, all love, all goodness. He's everything. So to the extent that we have life, existence, whatever, it's all from God. So we also see that when he makes that statement, it's kind of a strange, obscure thing in Scripture. So they're coming to get Jesus. They're armed, and they've got torches and swords, and they're just coming to get Jesus. And so they ask him if he was the Nazarene, and Jesus says, I am. So then guess what happens? These guys, they're armed, and there's a bunch of them. There's just one Jesus there waiting. It says they turned around and fell to the ground because of the power of the I am statement, because he is everything in the universe connected to him. He is all that is. So one of the triple statements, one of the great ones is, I am the way and the truth and the life. So that's a threefold I am statement. And then I think, you can argue with me if you want, but I think probably the most important one is where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And he repeats it about 5 times in the Gospel, John chapter 6. So I have it over there on the wall, I am the bread of life, John 6, and over here, I am the living bread, come down from heaven. It's somewhat of a variation of I am the bread of life, I am the living bread. Because it's so important that Jesus teaches us about his real presence in the Eucharist, that at the Mass, during the consecration of the bread and the wine are displaced and the substance is changed into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, and then we enter into the presence of Christ. Of course, remember Jesus is born in Bethlehem, which means house of bread. So from the very beginning, he was teaching us to connect him with the Eucharist. So that's one of the things. John is so, to me, so wonderfully inspirational. Now, as we celebrate the Holy Family today, I think it's important for us to remember for our kids to have saints. My dad got me a painting of St. Thomas Aquinas, and I had a statue of Michael the Archangel. That's my baptism name. I'm baptized Herbert Thomas, and my Michael the Archangel is my confirmation name. But I think it's important for the children to have their namesake, which saint they're named after, maybe a picture or a statue. And the home is considered the domestic church. So at your house, you should have things there to indicate that the house belongs to God, that believers live there, disciples of Christ. So St. John Vianney, the patron saint of parish priests, he preached a whole homily on how important it is to have a crucifix in your house, especially in the living room, so that when people come in, they know that this house belongs to Christ. So the importance of having sacred images in your home. The Spanish, of course, are wonderful when it comes to Our Lady Guadalupe. They usually have a statue or a picture or both. And so the Blessed Mother as well, to have images of her, Jesus, and Mary. And I always have a statue of St. Joseph as well. So these things are good to inspire, I think. I was inspired by this beautiful painting, well done. I've never seen it anywhere else, but anyway, it's Jesus is pointing to his Sacred Heart, and you can see the Sacred Heart. Jesus, he's smiling, and no one ever told me anything about it, but I used to stand there as a little boy and look at the picture, and I knew that meant Jesus loved me because he was pointing to his heart, and he was smiling, and he looked really happy, and so I think that was very helpful for me as a child growing up. And we had the image of the Assumption of Mary. We had a giant painting of the agony in the garden where Jesus is praying, and you can see the disciples in the background, sleeping. And we had the Last Supper and some other things. So that, for me, as a little boy and as I grew up to be a teenager, all those things were helpful. So I encourage you all to take advantage of pictures and statues and other sacramentals to help your children in your home. And it's good for you even as an adult. I still enjoy having those things. And now think about if we came into the church here, we had a bunch of white walls with nothing here. Be kind of a letdown, wouldn't it? But we have all this beautiful art that teaches and inspires us in the gospel. So that's why it's important to have those things. Another thing that's important is prayer. So Father Patrick Peyton, who started the Family Rosary Crusade, they had their saying, the family that prays together stays together. So he's very big on the rosary. And so I encourage you to consider, I don't know who wrote that prayer, bless us, O Lord, in these I guess. Maybe it was a pious nun, I don't know, or some old Monsignor. But in any event, it wasn't Jesus. Now, Jesus gives us the Our Father and the Hail Mary we have from the Archangel Gabriel, from God the Father. So think about it. What do we say in the Lord's Prayer? Give us this day our daily bread. So we're asking for bread for the body, food on the table, and we're asking for the Eucharistic bread, because the original Greek says supersubstantial bread, the bread of life, the Eucharist. So when we say, give us this day our daily bread, we're asking for God to continue to feed us, because we are fed by the hand of God, whether we realize it or not. If you're lucky enough to have food on the table, it's because God put it there for you. And then we are fed at Mass at the table of the Lord at the altar with the bread of life, the supersubstantial bread. So we're asking for two things when we say that give us this day our daily bread in the Lord's Prayer. So just as a thought, there's 365 days in a year, and if you say together as a family, maybe the Our Father at the beginning or the Hail Mary at the end, or maybe an Our Father and Hail Mary, it won't take you that long, a minute or so, to thank God that you have food on your table, because some people don't. And so at the end of the year, you'll have prayed the equivalent of about 7 rosaries, 365 Our Fathers, 365 Hail Marys. If you do one Our Father and one Hail Mary, every time you sit down as a family to gather for prayer. And so, family dinner is always a good time. The families together won't take that long, but the blessings would be incredible, I think, for the family to be able to pray an Our Father and a Hail Mary every day at dinner time with the father and mother and the children. A great way for us to try to be like the Holy Family. So holy means connected to and dedicated to God. So the closer we are to God, the more holiness we have. So as we celebrate the Feast of the Holy Family, which is Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, we recall that we should try to make our families holy families and families of prayer.